Welcome into another video. And this time, we're going to talk to you about Diontae Johnson. A very controversial player. I feel like people either love him, hate him, or some people are somewhere in the middle. But it's a regression show. We're going to talk about potential positive regression. I have opinions. Conan has opinions. A lot of people have opinions. But Conan, why don't you start by telling us kind of why you wanted to do an episode about Diontae Johnson?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I thought of something. Our episode today was going to be about who's someone that should see positive regression, meaning they had maybe not their best year in 2022, but we're not expecting more of the same. We're expecting better results, better future, and really the first name I thought of when I thought about some of those things was you know Mr. Deontay Johnson over there with his 0 touchdowns last year, despite, as some of us know, he had the 6th most targets overall. And even more surprising, he had the 10th most red zone targets. So he had 18 red zone targets. And how many were touchdowns? 0. So
And
zero
I think
touchdowns.
people would be surprised by that. I think people would understand that he had a lot of targets. I think most people know that, but I don't think people would know that he had 18 red zone targets. I mean, to be honest, I didn't know that. So it's kind of an interesting piece of information because you would think with 18 red zone targets that you would have a touchdown. He just didn't happen to have one. So he was very unlucky. I think we can all agree on that.
Absolutely.
And I know that a lot of people are talking about how 2022 may or may not have been an outlier, but I think it's important to note that there's a lot of change in the Steelers offense. And I know you had a lot to say about some of those changes. So go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, so you kind of absolutely nailed it where some people think it's an outlier, some people don't, whatever, but I'm definitely under the assumption that really 2022 is not what we've come to expect, what we know of Deontay Johnson as a player. And I'm really gonna go with that 2022 was an outlier. That was, he didn't catch any touchdowns despite, like I said, the 10th most red zone targets among wide receivers. I don't expect something like that to happen again, where he's just getting so unlucky. And another way we can tell that he was unlucky is he actually almost had as many unrealized air yards as actual receiving yards. So he had 875 unrealized air yards, which is a lot. And compared to, he had 882 actual receiving yards, which is certainly lower than what we expect from him on a yearly basis, especially the last 2 years. And so I think there's a few different ways where he was really unlucky. Obviously, yes, the touchdowns, we don't expect 0. Like that's crazy. Like I believe that is the most targets in a season without a touchdown ever, like all time. And I
Pretty
don't
sure
think
that's
that's
true.
that. Yeah, and I don't think that's that surprising. But I do think there's other points where, like I said, with the unrealized air yards, that was, I don't think that many air yards will go unrealized this year. Hopefully, I think
Doesn't
that's.
always pay off, though. Remember, there was
Mhm.
Curtis Samuel of Air Yards fame. Curtis Samuel of Air Yards fame. I always said, oh, I don't care. I don't care. I don't care. He's still going to suck. He's still going to suck. And then he still sucked. So it doesn't always pay off. It
Mhm.
is a good indicator, but it's not perfect. It's not perfect. So I just want people to realize that it's not a guarantee that he's going to bounce back based
Yeah.
on air yards.
Absolutely. And then, so I just wanted to look at a couple other things of like what really went wrong or what was different in 2022 as opposed to, 2020 when he was pretty good. And then last year, 2021, I mean, he finished as a top 10 wide receiver. So when I looked into it, it was really, some things that really stood out were his target accuracy, just like how accurate the targets he was actually getting were. And so obviously we know he didn't have, Mr. Checkdown, Mr. Can't throw it that far, Big Ben anymore. So I expect that target quality or that target accuracy to go down a little bit, but it took a significant hit compared to 2020 and 2021. And so I do think that's part of the reason why he wasn't quite what we've come to expect in the years prior. And then another big difference I saw was actually, I mean, he had the same exact A dot, his average depth of target in 2020 and in 2021, which was 8.2 yards. And that actually jumped up to 10.6, which is a pretty, like, that's a significant jump in your A dot. And so I do think, that some of these things coupled with obviously the unluckiness, that kind of really was the driving force behind such a disappointing and just down year. Um, and I mean, we haven't even really gotten, I just talked about ADOT, some target accuracy, but obviously he's
10.6
got
is
a
still not that high, you know.
no, it's not. But compared to where he was at getting so many targets at 8.2, like I understand why, if he's getting that target 2 plus yards farther now, that's, the average of where he's getting it, that I understand why it's less, caught passes, the accuracy went down. So it kind of makes sense. The story checks out where, it didn't line up like it had the previous years. And then obviously we getting to Kenny Pickett. Like he's,
Oh,
the
Kenny
only first
Pickett.
the only first round quarterback in that class. And, he didn't have a great year, if you could even say that. He had 7 passing touchdowns. And another big thing was that he had 40 interceptable passes, and that's per player profiler, and that was the second most among quarterbacks.
He only
And
had
so
9 interceptions, so it's kind of crazy that he had 40 interceptable passes.
it's it was a very high number. And so I mean, I do think with any, player going from year 1 to year 2, I think we have to kind of expect a little bit of an upswing in terms of just his overall play. And I do think there's a couple things where he flashed some signs of things to come. For example, pressured completion percentage. He was at 50.9%. That was actually sixth highest among quarterbacks. And then another one was deep ball completion percentage. I mean, that's always important. That's being talked about. He was at 41.5%. Doesn't seem that high, but that was actually ninth highest among quarterbacks. So, there were some signs where we can look at it and say, okay, maybe he didn't play that well overall. But if we look at a couple different things that he worked, that he, did pretty well on, there were some things where we can look forward and say, okay, these things, they stay around near their number. And maybe he raises that red zone completion percentage up from 40.4%, where he was 28th best. and maybe he keeps going on some of these other things where he did flash. And so I think that's really the hope, is that we have year 2 Kenny Pickett, who's going to take a little step forward. We don't expect him to, make this all world jump into becoming a really, really awesome quarterback. No, like I'm not saying that, but I do think we can expect better than rookie year Kenny Pickett. I think the team has made several just big investments in their offensive line, just their offense in general. They're getting back, a piece in terms of, Calvin Austin didn't even play all last year. They brought in another tight end. They
Calvin Austin
brought in
barely
some.
counts.
Yes, yeah, yeah. But I'm just talking about some changes, some just good things for the offense overall. And also, I mean, it's not like Deontay Johnson is really the only guy in town where defenses can really focus on him. I think we all know George Pickens. He's just a human highlight reel in terms of, when he gets that ball thrown toward him, he's doing something crazy, and it'll be on, social media later where you can rewatch and rewatch. And then you got Pat Fryermuth, who's been just very consistent in his first few years in the league. And so I do think that Deontay Johnson, with all of these things, maybe, he got unlucky. And I'm not expecting really every year for him to finish like he did in 2020 or 2021, where he was the wide receiver 8. But I kind of feel like right in between where he finished in 2020, which was wide receiver 21, and then 2021, where he was wide receiver 8, somewhere in that range, I think is kind of a good expectation, where he's, maybe in that wide receiver 15 to 20 range. And so, sure enough, I kind of wanted to look at his lines. And so, if he had exactly the same lines as he had last year, but we actually just gave him, 6 touchdowns, not that many, but compared to his first 3 years, he had 8, 7, and 5. So, kind of in the middle. So we give him 6 touchdowns. That would have put him at the wide receiver 20 among wide receivers last year. So I just think that's kind of a realistic expectation. And it's not really like he's now out of the top 30 wide receivers. And that's kind of where he's being drafted pretty among consensus. And So I think there's better days to come. I think we've seen what type of player he is in past years. Sure, he does not have the same quarterback that allowed those finishes in fantasy, but I do think that there's better days to come. And I think starting this year, I think he'll definitely be closer to where he was in 2020 and 2021.
I wish. I mean, I don't know, man. I don't. Wide receiver's tough. I mean, if you do redraft ranks, and I think people are going to start to do redraft ranks, it's tough. There's a big drop off after that kind of third or fourth tier, however you want to call it. There's this large, very large group. It has like 15 players in it. I could easily see Deontay Johnson being near the top of that group or near the bottom. The thing with Deontay Johnson is I don't think we're ever getting the 169 targets from 2021 again. I don't think he scored 8 touchdowns that year. That's probably about the most I could see. I don't know. Kenny Pickett, he's fine. I'm not like a huge believer, but I don't hate him. George Pickens could take a step forward, and that could take a little bit away from Diontae Johnson. I would, if you gave me the 147 targets from last year, I would take the under. I would take under 147. I would say less. So, yeah, he could be a low-end wide receiver 1 if everything goes right. I don't think everything's going to go right. I'm not super in on Deontay Johnson. It feels kind of weird because I do think he's a good player, but in Dynasty, I'm mostly out. He's turned 27 this summer, and the problem is that he's 27 now. If the season is middling, the value is going to be gone on Deontay Johnson. He's just kind of a player who's kind of there, but I'm scared if Kenny Pickett doesn't deliver, then he's 28 going to a new quarterback or stuck with a bad quarterback, and the Dynasty value is just gone. So I'm mostly out on Deontay Johnson. I don't hate him, but I also don't think that picking Deontay Johnson is going to win your league. I just don't. I don't think you're going to win your league with Deontay Johnson. I'd rather take my chances on someone players who I think are going behind Deontay Johnson or in some formats behind Treylon Burks or Brandon Ayuk. Players I think who have more upside than Deontay Johnson.
Yeah.
And who I think are just as talented. I mean, I think they're very talented players. I mean, Burks is far better prospect. And he has far more upside as a first-round pick. You know, he has that alpha upside. Deontay Johnson is more of a pseudo-alpha. He was Big Ben's alpha, but he's not really an alpha receiver in the NFL. Without Big Ben, I think the wide receiver 1 upside is gone because there's no lock-on targets anymore. So I'm kind of middling on Deontay Johnson, I would say, overall.
I think you're absolutely right. Where I think we're at the end of the day, we're kind of just betting on Deontay Johnson's actual talent to hopefully come through, and just a little jump in Pickett's just efficiency, his overall productivity going into his second year. But I mean, I mostly agree with what you said. He's not going to win you your leagues, but I do think that was just the first name that I thought of in terms of who had a really down 2022 and who I just kind of expect to bounce back a little bit.
Yeah, for me, what I'm noticing from this lesson is that I don't mind having Deontay Johnson on my team. So what I'm going to want is I don't really care much between wide receiver 17 and wide receiver 30. So this year in redraft, I'm going to be loading up on some wide receivers early. I really love them. And then I'll be, backfilling my team with other positions later and coming back to wide receiver with whoever falls in like the 6th, 7th, 8th round. Because there will be guys there who I find as values. Brandon Ayuk is probably top of that list. But anyway, I appreciate everyone for watching this video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and hit the notifications bell so you can catch up on all our future content. And yeah, we'll see you all next time.